Good morning mga katribu and welcome to another episode of Daily Tribune Straight Talk where we discuss current issues that matter to all Filipinos to teach us. I am Komfie Manalo. We are live on Daily Tribune's Facebook page and Tribune Now on YouTube. Our guest for today is Todd Schweitzer, the co-founder and CEO of Brancas, an independent financial management and payments platform. Todd has held senior roles at private equity firm Seawood Resources and Management Consultancy, Booz and Company, spanning technology, public sector, and financial services. He holds a dual bachelor's degree from the University of California, Irvine, and a master in public policy from Harvard University. Please welcome Mr. Todd Schweitzer, co-founder and CEO of Brancas. Good morning, Mr. Todd.
Hi, good morning, Komfie.
Yeah, it's nice to
so
see
much.
you. Thank you for coming and thank you for accepting our invitation. So, Todd, during the pandemic, everybody was into digitization. So it was surprising that the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of digital lifestyle in the Philippines, and fortunately there was infrastructure support already. The logistics support were there, the internet support were there, and even the social media platforms were there that allowed the small businesses to thrive during that pandemic, even while most businesses, big businesses, were closed.
Yeah.
And fortunately for them, working on the background, of course, are the open finance platforms through your APIs. And we would like you to enlighten us more how this new financial system is influencing our lives, and how will this new digital lifestyle will further improve our lives and allow small-scale operator or small-scale businesses to thrive and actually compete with the big guns. So, Todd, can you tell us what is an open financial system and what are its advantages?
Yeah. So thanks, Komfie. I think you're right to start with the pandemic and COVID as a starting point. We have to remember, in March of 2020, the vast majority of Filipinos, the way they interacted with the bank is kind of brick and mortar, visiting a branch, visiting the RM, but actually internally at the banks, that's how they operated as well. Showing up to the office, running their operations on a desktop computer inside the main bank headquarters. And so all of that was disrupted. You immediately had a situation where bank branches were closed, or even if they were open, limited hours with few staff and only a handful of people in. So they really had to force operations in a digital and a work from home manner. So what did that do? That created a wedge where the financial institutions that were already digital, they accelerated like crazy, right? So you had some digital banks that had online account opening or online services that saw hundreds of thousands of customers move to that bank. At the same time, I remember interviewing someone for an IT role at Brancas. And this person was a senior IT person at a large bank here in the Philippines. The first 6 weeks of the pandemic, they couldn't even operate the bank because they needed to, A, procure laptops for their staff, because the staffs didn't even have laptops, and they needed to set up a VPN service, which is basically a secure way to pipe into the bank's infrastructure from home. So the bank didn't even have the infrastructure for people to work from home. So they had to stop operations. For a while, they had no new account opening whatsoever, while other banks that already had digital account opening and digital services accelerated. So that created a big wedge, and it, I think, also demonstrated just how much opportunity there is to improve digital financial services here in the Philippines. So coming to open finance, what is open finance? It's a term that's used a lot now. There's a BSP set of memos and circulars, and they now have a working group called the OFOC-TG that's actually designing the first policies on this. But really, open finance is the next generation of banking here in the Philippines, where you're separating the financial product from where a customer accesses that product. Now, what does that mean? Typically, the way you interact with a bank in version 1 banking, you interact with the bank by showing up at the branch, calling your relationship manager, calling branch manager, maybe dialing the call center. In version 2, you're moving online, but you're still using bank products, right? So you're still accessing the bank's app, going to the bank's ATM, going to the bank's website. So you're interacting with your financial products based on the stuff that the bank has built for you, right? But actually, banks are not very good at building software. Some are better than others, but banks are not good at building software. What banks are good at is managing risk, managing their balance sheet, and being asset managers and being a regulated entity. But that's a very different skill set than building software apps for customers. So what Open Finance is it allows for, through API technology, you to connect a financial product into a third-party app. Now, that third-party app could be a SME app for basic day-to-day operations. It could be an e-wallet.
An e-wallet,
right?
Yes.
Where Gcash today offers account opening through CIMB and BPI inside the Gcash app. It could be connecting to crypto so that I can move funds back and forth from my PDAX account into my bank account and back and forth, or even have an aggregated balance so I can see my fiat currency and my peso and USD currency side by side. So what Open Finance does is it's a technology that allows me as the customer to access my financial products through the apps that I choose, which creates a lot of innovation.
So through the API.
Indeed.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I'll give this analogy of what an API is. Say, I went to a restaurant. I ordered food to be cooked by a chef. But between me and the chef, I have no connection. So the API there will be the waiter. So the waiter will be the link between me as a customer and the chef. Is that how? Yeah.
That's the best analogy, and it's more than simply a messenger. So number one, instead of cooking the meal myself, somebody else is cooking it. So instead of building a piece of software myself, I'm using someone else's software. In this case, CIMB using Gcash, for example, for account opening, right? But not only that, it's the waiter that's standardizing the experience. So they're providing the standard menu, they're giving recommendations, they are managing the payment, they're bringing out the dishes. So they're providing a standard experience so that you don't have to run back and forth to the kitchen. So absolutely. So that waiter analogy in software makes it much easier to develop software products without needing to do kind of one-by-one builds with each partner.
Okay. So you mentioned that Open Finance is the next evolution in banking, and because banks have a not great experience in developing software, but they're good at managing risks and of course managing their balance sheet. So, but the banking sector has also been propagating about open banking. So, what is the difference between open banking and open finance?
Oh, so open banking is a term that came out of the UK, and there is a specific kind of regulatory regime called open banking because it was a regulatory requirement where the banks needed to provide, they're required by the government to provide certain APIs. Actually, in Southeast Asia, number one, I don't see in the Philippines a open banking requirement, not at least anytime soon. But you are seeing an open finance ecosystem where the non-bank open finance participants are actually the first movers. So that's the e-wallets, that's the remittance companies, that's the crypto companies. It's the non-bank consumer finance companies that are looking to extend their lending products or to use data to do a better credit score. So the difference between open banking and open finance, frankly, is that open finance is covering non-bank financial service providers, and it's the non-banks that are usually earlier adopters.
Yeah, these non-bank financial institutions like e-wallet, remittances, but they are providing banking services through open finance. And how will these open finance companies or enablers impact our lives, and how will that provide advantage to the vulnerable and unserved sectors?
Yeah. Let me tell you by way of analogy, right? So I think the biggest impact that open finance can have is on the unbanked and underbanked population. So let me describe something from Indonesia. There's a company, e-fishery, in Indonesia, which was which was launched in order to provide monitoring software for aquaculture. So tilapia farmers, shrimp farmers, right? Like the fish ponds, right? So originally they provided software so that the farmers could have better yields and track the acidity levels, track nutrition and feeds, track the overall kind of the science of fish farming, right? So they've been very, very successful. They've grown, I think, to 30, 40,000 SMEs, right? Now, these are SMEs in the far-flung provinces, very far from a city, very far from any bank. So actually, for a bank to provide lending or savings or payment products to this population is very expensive, right? Because for a bank traditionally to reach that population, they're building a branch, they're running cash logistics, cash trucks and boats to get cash to the province. They have physical security, they need to have IT infrastructure, they need to find staff for the branch, right? So actually the cost of serving that population through like a brick and mortar like branch model doesn't make sense, right? And it's a rational decision for them to say, don't bother, right? Because that's a low income community, they're hard to reach, forget about it. That is fundamentally why 50% of Filipinos are unbanked. Now, why do I bring up e-fishery? E-fishery started providing software to these fish farmers, these tilapia farmers in Indonesia, right? Now, they just raised something like $90 million for their next round of funding. Why? Because they now have a financial services marketplace where they are delivering credit products, savings products, payment products, remittance products. You can do all sorts of financing, which they make available by having partner banks that provide the API into the e-fishery app. They're getting data from the SMEs about how they operate, and then they can feed that data back to the banks so the banks can actually serve that population without building a branch, without building a fishing app, right? And they can actually deliver financial services more cost effective to that group. So the end result is you now have a banked population. They don't have to rely on 5-6. They don't have to rely on, a half-day commute to the branch. They can actually access financial services through the e-fishery app based on their day-to-day activities. So that's what Open Finance can enable. It can unlock certain customer groups that were previously unreachable or not worth it by the banks.
Yeah, but to serve this unbanked, unserved, in far-flung communities, you have to have third-party services to provide financial services or banking services for the banks. And you mentioned also that for them to do that, they need data. So Open Finance allows the sharing of data and banking information to other companies. So what guarantee that we can have that our data that will be shared by the banks to these third-party services can be protected or safe?
Yeah.
And how will this system provide us opportunities or advantages?
Yeah, it's a good question, and of course there's more and more news about data breaches and personal information being leaked. The Philippines has an advantage through the National Privacy Commission. It's one of the only countries in Asia that has a centralized national line agency focused on consumer data protection. And of course, as you can imagine, the main industries they're focused on are healthcare data and financial services data, right? So actually the Philippines, of course, there are concerns about scamming and the SMS,
SMS scam, that's
scamming and all this. So and unfortunately, the Philippines does have a sizable industry on different types of data scams, whether it's credit card sales or whatever. But the National Privacy Commission has already put out very clear guidelines on what best practice is if you are handling personally identifiable data. They have best practices on how you capture consent. So how do I know that if Komfie is sharing his data with me, or if he's authorizing me as an agent to share his data to a bank, how do I know that Komfie is actually given consent, that he knows what he's giving consent for, that he's giving consent for a one-time sharing, or whether it's recurring as there are more transactions? The National Privacy Commission has pretty clear guidelines on this. And they're continuing to develop guidelines on this. So I think my answer is, every company that is handling user data, sensitive user data, should be proactively applying as a registered NPC registered company, and that compels them to comply with certain data protection requirements that the NPC has outlined.
So you mean, say, my bank, if they will share my data, my information to say e-wallet or a remittance services, they need my consent.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
the consent is could be one time or infinite.
Correct. So this
okay.
is a big difference with open finance. Let me just take Facebook as an
Yeah.
example, right? You and I using Facebook, that is data that Facebook is using every moment that we're on Facebook to
Yeah.
turn it into ad targeting, right?
Yes, yes.
So now, I'm sure in our terms and conditions when we sign up for an account, we agreed to allow Facebook to offer our data, but like literally, I have no idea how Facebook is using my data in order to target advertisers,
Yes.
right? I just know that they are, but I'm not giving consent for them to do so because I gave some consent in the terms of service, but I do not know what they're doing with my data today. With open finance, it is explicitly the customer giving permission to share their data for a specific purpose, and they need to follow, and the NPC has guidelines on how they give that consent. So if you are applying for a loan and you want to link your e-commerce data, or you want to link your Shopee, maybe you're a Shopee seller, right? So you're a Shopee seller, or Lazada seller, you're a merchant, and you have transaction history, how much sales you've done, what types of products, your seller rating, how responsive you are, different data points, right? You can say, I'm willing to share these data points with a lender so that I can access a loan, maybe to buy more inventory, right? Or on the customer side, maybe I can link my bank account so that I can share my transaction data, I can see a rough idea of my income, and that gives me access to a faster loan approval for a vehicle, or maybe also for buy now, pay later shopping online. So each time you are giving explicit permission that say, I want to share my data because it will give me access to some financial product or give me value in some way.
Okay, thank you very much. Those were interesting insights given to us by Todd Schweitzer on how we can take advantage of open finance, especially for the underserved or unbanked sectors in far-flung communities. But before we continue with our questions, we will take a short break, but we will be back. Stay tuned.
Welcome ka dito sa SM. Come as you are. Mahilig ka man sa pabago-bago o sa paikot-ikot. Yung nag-a-adulting or parenting. Ikaw na kulot, white-haired, purple-haired, kayong magkaibigan na nagkaibigan. Buong barkada. Yung gusto mo, chill lang. Or gawin yung feel mo lang. We know you're changing. So we're changing with you. Come on in. We're all in. At SM, you're always welcome here.
Sa likod ng aming mga pagsisikap, hangad namin ang maiangat ang bawat Pilipino. Magbigay pag-asa. Maging kaagapay sa pagbangon, katuwang sa pag-abot ng pangarap. At maging lakas at sandigan ng isang masigasig na bayan. PAGCOR, creating opportunities beyond gaming.
And welcome back to Straight Talk. Here with us again is Mr. Todd Schweitzer, the co-founder and CEO of Brandcast. So before we took a break, we're talking about data privacy, how our data can be used to our advantage, where we can the banks or financial institutional services can share our data to other financial institutions, so we can say take a loan, and then how open finance will actually finally provide and then onboard these unbanked and unserved and vulnerable sectors into the formal financial sector. So now we will be asking more questions for Mr. Todd Schweitzer to give us more an in-depth or more in-depth or more insight into what and how can open finance really uplift our daily life. So, Todd, so how will the sharing of data from multiple sources build innovative and more inclusive financial services?
Yeah. So first of all, open finance is more than data sharing, but usually data sharing is a starting point. And the reason that matters in the Philippines is you do not have a credit bureau or some kind of central database where if I'm lending to you, I can just ping that database and I get a score on Komfie that says Komfie's credit score is 780, therefore he qualifies for a low interest loan, right? That doesn't really exist here. There are credit risk databases, so you can check if someone's on a blacklist, you can check if someone has pending loans, but that list may not be up to date. So typically in the Philippines, if you are lending, you need to figure out from scratch what is the credit risk profile or the credit worthiness of that borrower, right? And so that's why when you apply for a loan, let's say for a home loan or a vehicle loan, or even just for a cash loan, you're providing certificate of employment, you're providing bank statements, you're providing IDs, you're providing some evidence that you're going to be a good borrower, right? Now, that is very manual. That is very, it's manual for you. It's tedious for the bank because they need to manually encode this data. It's also prone to fraud because lots of people are not going to give authentic documents, or maybe they will omit certain documents that are not valuable, right? However, if I, as the borrower, instead of giving the paper, if I give permission to share my employment verification, my bank transaction history, my other outstanding loans, if I agree to share that in an automated way with the lender, then the lender is getting verified data and they can make a faster decision. So that's one piece. I think in the Philippines, because we don't have this infrastructure, the more efficient loan and credit products are more is really an initial use case. The other big improvement that open finance can sort related to data is, so in accounting it's called reconciliation, but really what it means is being able to match transactions. So you and I both know, like when we look at our bank statements, it's sometimes hard to know if there's a credit or a debit, which one is which is if it's an InstaPay transaction, it usually just says incoming InstaPay. The only time you usually have detailed information on a line item is if it's the same bank transfer, right? Even if it's a fee from the bank, sometimes you don't know what that fee is, right? So imagine, now that's for personal accounts. Imagine for a business, and imagine for an online business that has hundreds or thousands of these transactions each day, right? I've visited e-commerce sites, for example, or other online businesses where they have a whole team of people just doing transaction matching, figuring out which line item in the bank transaction statement matches which customer order or which supplier payment. And they need to do manual matching one by one. So providing the automated data that connects the customer's accounts with some accounting software can actually make it easier to keep a real world view of your finances.
Like your usage of the e-wallets and the usage of e-commerce websites and sometimes remittance services, those data that are accumulated there, can those be used or to determine your credit score?
Absolutely. So there's e-commerce data for sure, both for the merchants and for the customers. So for the merchant, it's basically a verified way of tracking verifying your sales and your revenue and your integrity as a seller, because the customer rating and all that. It also can point out what kinds of products you're selling, right? If it's a higher value set of products, then maybe that's more valuable for the lender, right? And then on the customer side, it's a rough idea of what kind of cash flow you have if you're spending X amount, right? Or actually the types of stuff you're buying, right? So certainly e-commerce data, telco data as well, So there are companies like FinScore and Trusting Social here that have built a whole alternative credit scoring business around customers' telco data. So things like, are you a postpaid or prepaid customer? How long has your SIM been active? Because there's a correlation between using the same phone number for a long time and being a more reliable borrower. So there's all these sort of interesting correlations, but it's all alternative data for credit scoring because it's not available on hand by the banks.
So those digital footprints are very important for your credit score.
Definitely.
Okay. So what are the benefits of open finance in the promotion of financial inclusion?
The biggest benefit to me is there are two. Number one is addressing the unbanked, so making it easier for the unbanked population to access online financial services. So that's like the e-fishery example, reaching populations in the province outside of the branch network that can still access financial services. The second is if a lender, again, I go back to lending, if a lender is able to more appropriately score you as a borrower, then there's a lower risk profile for you, so they should be able to charge a bit less because there's a lower risk of loss because they're able to identify the good borrowers or at least identify risk more efficiently, right? What it can also do is provide a little bit more competition because when you apply for a loan, it's now easier to get quotes from 5 different providers versus 5 different sets of documents, 5 different sets of papers. So typically you just go, I'll just apply with one.
Yeah, and I've noticed because I've been using e-wallets and of course I've been using digital banks and I've been receiving a lot of pre-approved loans from these banks. So
Yeah.
so does that are those offers influenced by my digital footprints? And can the same be applied to these unserved and unbanked sectors because they don't have a bank account, but they are frequent users of e-wallets, like a farmer who don't have a bank account or a fisherman who doesn't have a bank account, but they have e-wallets and they constantly use those e-wallets to transfer money or receive payment. So
Yeah.
Is my experience with my bank can be applied to this sector as well?
Yeah, well, I don't know why you're getting pre-qualified could mean many things, right? Number one, it could just be marketing where, yes, you're pre-qualified, but when you actually do the application, maybe you're not actually qualified. So it might just be a promotion.
Okay.
It might be because you have lending history with other institutions, and that data has been provided to a credit bureau, so they say, hey, this is a good borrower. It could be because of your online footprint, but I would be a little bit surprised because of the consent thing. So you have not given consent to share your GCash data, for example, with these banks.
Yeah.
So they should not be scoring you based on that data because they shouldn't have access yet, right?
Okay.
But the e-wallet data for sure is an example. Basically anything that can serve as a way to identify are you a good, reliable borrower? Or if you're not a good, reliable borrower, then what is the right type of product for you, like financial product for you?
Okay. So a majority of Filipinos remain unbanked. So how can open finance, like you mentioned, before the pandemic, 70% of the Filipinos were unbanked, but after the pandemic, now we're at 50% remain unbanked. And how can open finance encourage this unbanked sectors to be included in the formal financial system?
Yeah, it allows for a new generation of startups to build products using open finance. So in Broncos, we just hosted with Kaya Founders, which is a venture capital firm based here in the Philippines. And we had 11 startups participate in an accelerator where they were building products using open finance. So these are companies like JeepPay that is connecting financial services to the jeepney drivers and jeepney passengers, not just for payments, but eventually for a whole financial services marketplace. We have companies like Cropital that are using open finance data to finance farmers and to actually provide credit scoring for the rural banks and the cooperatives that are serving these farmers. We have companies like Mochi and Maru and others that are kind of filling in the gaps, right? but they're built. They are not fintechs necessarily, but they're using open finance technology to provide financial services to populations that don't usually have access. So that's how, by providing this APIs, by supporting the startups that are using open finance, we can actually reach new populations and create new products.
So you mentioned APIs that links third-party services with these banking institutions. So what is Open Finance API and how does it work to allow the safe sharing of data? But before you answer that, we will take a quick break. So we will be back.
Aling Rose! May kaganda ng kamatis mo ah. Magkano to, Aling Rose?
80 per kilo.
Ha? More naman?
Maganda kasi.
Naku.
Mang Henry, ang mura naman ng kamatis ninyo.
Hindi porket maganda ay dapat mahal na. Gaya ng tanim mo. Sa iSmart Boom Flower, bunga ay sagana sa presyong abot kaya.
iSmart Boom Flower, bunga ay sagana sa presyong abot kaya. iSmart.
Josel Dariaga po.
At Maita Basa David.
Good news! Sa kabila ng pagtaas ng mga bilihin, bumaba ng 7 centavos ang rates ngayong October. 9 pesos and 86 centavos per kilowatt hour ang overall electricity rates. Dahil ito sa decrease sa feed-in tariff for renewable energy at bawas singil ng generation companies na naka-offset sa paghina ng piso. Nasa 15 pesos ang bawas sa bill ng karaniwang bahay. Paalala po, lalo na ngayon, excited tayong maghandaan uli sa Pasko after 2 years. Ugaliin pa rin nating maging energy efficient para handa tayo kung sakaling magpatuloy ang pagtaas ng global fuel prices, inflation at paghina ng piso.
Tama, lumalaki ang mga gastusin. Scary.
Ako? Never scared. Pati sa bills.
Ganyan pag energy efficient. Gaya nito, habang mainit ang food, huwag i-ref para hindi hirap ang makina. At kung di puno, ibaba ang setting from high to mid. 202 pesos ang monthly savings.
Kung bibili naman ng new ref, hindi porke mas maliit, mas matipid.
Huh?
Ang portable mini ref na 0.35 cubic feet, mas makonsumo kaysa 7 cubic feet.
Alamin ang konsumo ng appliances with the Meralco Mobile App's Appliance Calculator.
US Bills Care!
May tanong tungkol sa bill o Meralco services? Video chat tayo.
Mag-book ng appointment anytime sa aming website. Hanggang sa susunod na Meralco Advisory.
And we're back. Welcome to Straight Talk. And still with us is Mr. Todd Schweitzer, co-founder and CEO of Brandcast. Before we took a break, we left a question for Mr. Todd. So, Todd, what is an open finance API and how does it work to allow the safe sharing of data?
Yeah, so API is it's an acronym. It means Application Programming Interface, which is a technical term, but really it is, as the analogy earlier, it's like a waiter in a restaurant that connects two different computer systems. Now, that seems like a very simple thing, but it requires basically a common communication. It requires security and encryption. And what it does is allow for me to use a software product or an app outside of that app, right? So you and I use APIs all the time if we open Waze, which is using Google Maps, right? Or we open we open the Grab app and it's using OpenStreetView, which is another or OpenStreetMaps, which is another mapping API. If you log into a website using Facebook, log in via Facebook, log in via Google, you're using Facebook or Google's API to authenticate you, which is a term that basically means they're verifying your identity because you agreed to share your Facebook identity information with that website. So that's what an API does. It allows, whether you're logging into a certain website using Facebook, so that's the Facebook API. In Open Finance, it's allowing you to connect and link your financial accounts through API. So if that means for example, I link my BPI account to my GCash, and then I can use my BPI account to pay, to top up my GCash wallet, all inside the GCash app. I don't need to go to a BPI branch. I don't need to open the BPI app because I already linked my BPI account to my GCash app.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to add that as well. Like when I use my GCash and then I pay for certain purchases or transfer money, you're actually using banking services there.
Yep.
Right. So we're actually using APIs every day. We just don't notice it because the services are already embedded into the system. So, question: how can an open finance enable access to financial facilities? Actually, you've mentioned it already, but we just want to you to expound on it.
Sure. So, I don't think any of us like visiting a bank branch and waiting 30, 45 minutes,
exactly.
right? And dealing with that. So it's nice that we now have more and more online financial services. So apps and, online banking website that we can access. But actually, let me give the example from a business, right? So Brancas today, for a Philippines company, our Philippines operation, when we need to handle our finances, we need to download bank statements, we need to upload those, we need to change the data format of the statements, we need to upload that into our accounting software, and then we do matching, right? Which was this payment, which was this collection, which invoice has been paid, matching one by one. So very tedious. So as a business, if we can use open APIs to plug that into our accounting software, then we can do automated tracking, automated payments, and we can do it from our accounting app, not from downloading bank statements, going back and forth, authorizing approvals, uploading payments. Okay, the payments are ready to release. I log into the bank branch, I release the payments. There's a lot of processes that can be automated. If I, as a business, could access my financial services from my accounting app, which is where I use to track my transactions and pay bills.
So API actually makes our lives easier.
Not just for consumers, but for businesses too.
Yeah. It helps a lot when these systems or these different languages or software languages can work seamlessly through API.
Yeah.
So before we let you go, we just want to ask you one final question. So, what are the products and services offered by Brancas, and what are your activities in the pipeline?
Yeah, thanks. So Brancas is an open finance technology company. A lot of what we do is provide the APIs that connect technology companies like the e-wallets, e-commerce, so that they can use these APIs. But a lot of what we do is supporting the banks. So providing solutions for the banks so that the banks can actually publish these API products and participate in the open finance economy, which means they can provide the APIs to offer account opening, provide APIs to offer lending. They can use third-party APIs to do better credit scoring. So a lot of what we do is providing technology to the banks here so that the banks can offer more efficient financial services. Upcoming events, so Brancas is participating in the Development Banks Conference here in Manila this week. I'm keynoting, and we are participating in the Singapore FinTech Festival. And then we have some big announcements too with a couple strategic partners, which we'll be promoting over the next week or so.
Yeah, we are excited with you that we want to cover that those announcements. So hopefully you can send us invites or press releases for your for those upcoming
Certainly.
events and those upcoming announcements from Brancas. And much that we would like to still learn more about from Mr. Todd Schweitzer and more about your company and about you, of course. Thank you so much, Todd,
My pleasure.
co-founder and CEO of Brancas, and for gracing us today. And hopefully we can accept our invitation again if we have something to if you have some more upcoming events or campaign that we can help you with.
Happy to. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Very
and we're
nice
happy
discussion.
to have you here. Yeah. And thank you mga katribu for tuning in. Watch Straight Talk Live every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Daily Tribune's Facebook page and Tribune Now on YouTube. Once again, I am Komfie Manalo and this has been Straight Talk.
We would like to thank the following: Araneta, Pag-ibig, SM Supermall, Veteran, Divina Law Offices, ICTSI, Xlog, Globe, Kia, PLDT, Cherry, Tanawan, Prime Homes, RLC, Pure Gold, Meralco, and SM Retail.